As this situation develops further, we have a group of countries in the world that are going to be most at risk, more at risk than other countries for a number of very particular reasons that it's important that we understand. One is these are countries with a high proportion of food imports. They are simply countries that are not able to grow enough food to feed themselves. And there are many, many countries around the world like this. For example, Japan. Does Japan produce enough food, enough rice, let's say, to feed itself? No. Large population. It's a first world country. But they have an economy. They sell cars in this case, in these cases, to earn the yen that they need to pay for their exports, right? They earn from the cars that they export, and they use that income to buy the food that they need, and they import it into their country. They're able to do that. So there's no sin for a country not to be able to feed all of its own people with food that they grow in their country. Most countries cannot do that, but they have an economy whereby they have a comparative advantage in the world where they can produce something to pay for the food they need to import. And there are a number of countries that are most affected now with these new trends who import a high proportion of their food. Those same countries will have limited international reserves at times. It's expensive to store food and to simply have it on hand in your country. Someone has got to pay for that. Food has a shelf life. You've got to rotate it. These are countries also that already are facing inflationary pressure. These same countries often, as you can well imagine, are in the third world where they have a high percentage, a high proportion of the hungry poor who we've been talking about, the bottom billion, and who are spending, again, a higher percentage of their income, meager as it may be, on their next meal. So these same countries, when they do experience an additional shock, again, many in their community are living on the edge, and they have a natural disaster, perhaps a conflict develops locally. Those, again, the most vulnerable living right on the edge, they will fall off. They will be most affected, and they will be in a crisis situation. So overall, the impact of these trends that we're talking about here will be greater in countries that already have a high incidence of hunger and the most vulnerable, already living on the edge. This map gives you an idea of where those countries are, and again, many of these will come as no surprise for you. Those in the darker red colors, countries most at risk, primarily in sub-Saharan Africa. You can see less so in Latin America. In Latin America, these are all countries and Central America as well. These are countries that have a higher percentage of indigenous people who are among the most vulnerable in these countries. And then, of course, Bangladesh, Myanmar, a couple countries in the Middle East. They are perhaps less vulnerable, but in terms of sheer numbers, most of the people that we're talking about most affected are actually in Asia and not in Africa. We have another phenomenon developing in many countries where there have been food riots and protests. Got to remember, in many countries that have been affected most by the increase in food prices, you have a new growing middle class. You know, much of the economic development has worked well in many of these regions and many of these countries. So perhaps families now have a motorcycle, let's say, for family transport. They maybe have a house. They're living in the city. They can send their kids to school. They're doing relatively well and maybe spending 40 to 50% of their income on food. But again, they're very much affected by the increase in food prices, and then they will protest if they feel that this is not just. They feel that the government perhaps is hoarding food in some cases, trying to build up their international stocks in their country because they would like to down the road be able to mitigate the effect of these prices if they should get worse. There's lots of reasons where people who are hungry, who are in these situations, if they feel there's injustice involved, they will riot. They will raise their voice. And we have seen this more and more, in particular in the Middle East now. in countries where they were not considered food insecure in the past, but they have now become much more food insecure because of the political uncertainty. We have another phenomenon of countries who are putting export restrictions on the food that they do produce. Especially, this has become a particular problem in many regions where countries are producing enough food for themselves. They have a commercial market where they are looking to trade with their neighbors, but because they are very much concerned about being able to feed their own population should the situation become worse, they then restrict exports. And that is bad for everyone. If free trade is not working where countries do not have the commercial access to the food that they need to import, then there are serious problems. We don't have enough countries in the world who are producing enough food extra that they can make up that difference. And this is a map to show you a number of countries that not necessarily now, but over the years have at various times restricted exports of grain in particular. So to sum up, you can well imagine the new face of hunger today as we see it. Refugees, IDPs, who are internally displaced people, so refugees within their own countries. You'll recognize this being a similar issue as we've seen elsewhere: infants and mothers, orphans and vulnerable school children, the rural poor, HIV affected and AIDS patients, small-scale farmers, subsistence level farmers. You can include female-headed households, pastoralists, and again, the urban poor who are living on less than $1 a day. Again, I'm often fond of saying that those most affected poor people, the hungry poor, are not stupid, they're not dumb, they're not unintelligent. They're stressed oftentimes. These situations will make them more stressed. They often will make poor choices because they may not be aware of certain situations. They may not have had access to education and be aware the way that they should be, but they will cope, and they will cope often very well, much better than most of us would, who are not used to living in these situations. And these are called coping strategies. It's important that we understand them. People will spend less on health care, preventive health care in particular, even if they have any access to health care. They will not send their kids to school. They will keep them at home to help on the farm or help earn income for the family. In urban areas, they'll send their kids out to beg on the street, if need be, simply to bring more cash into the family to be able to buy food and cover their basic needs. They will sell household assets in desperations. A key aspect that we always look at in terms of our vulnerability assessment mapping and our overall assessments in rural communities is monitoring farmers and if they try to sell their seeds. You always know that that is a key sign of major distress when farmers start to either eat their seeds or sell their seeds that they otherwise keep for the next season when they need to plant them. Obviously, at that point, they're making decisions based on very, very short-term needs, and it's a sign of major distress. They will purchase less nutritious food. This is often the case where they will purchase whatever is cheapest for them to fill the gap for their children so they can go from day to day. They'll consume less food, and they'll also eat fewer meals. Overall, they become less resilient to disasters and shocks. A few examples. Haiti. 61% of the children in Haiti under 5 and 46% of the women are anemic. Half of the Haitians are malnourished. 60% of household income goes to food. That's the situation in Haiti today. Mud cakes are sold in times of distress again as food. $1, the equivalent of $1, buys 8. These are mud cakes. You can see the woman here in the marketplace selling the cakes. Again, they can be very rough on the children's stomachs. They can cause diarrhea. They can fill a gap temporarily, but obviously the nutrition is not going to be there that the child requires. This is the very typical, what we call a famine food or a hunger food, where people will still spend the money for something that is simply filling the gap and providing no nutrition whatsoever. 56% of the population exists on less than $1 a day. And even the mud cakes then are going to be out of reach for most. Another example is in Burundi. This is cassava. Cassava prices have skyrocketed since last year, 200%. And the poorest households are now eating what's called black flour. And there's a picture here on the screen where moldy cassava, cassava that would otherwise not be sold in the market, is now sold at some price. And even the moldy cassava you see in the picture, the price of that has gone up threefold since the overall food price crisis has developed in the past couple of years.